Comedy and tragedy. There can be said to be two important aspects of comedy. One is a weapon, the other a shield. Comedy has the ability to lighten the load of worry and care that so pervade life. But comedy needs to be employed carefully. The miseries of life are real. It is important to face them and address them, to call them what they are. Comedy can be used too much as a distraction, a procrastination from the reality of need. Life is not all songs and perfumes, and comedy as a shield is a pressure valve for the mind. It relieves to some extent the burden of misery that is carried and seen all around, in journals, in hospitals and city streets, in the decimation of natural environments, in courts and in homes and schools. People are told to look on the bright side of life for a reason. It is all too easy to be swept up in what is not very bright about life, and comedy allows a moment to regroup, a release by which to find the strength to face difficult situations. Provided comedy is used in this way and not as a permanent distraction, as avoidance of true import and response, then it can be a useful and beneficial tool. The greatest benefit of comedy, however, is the way in which it may be used as a weapon, as a vehicle of approaching reality, of cutting into and exposing the truth of reality. Comedy has a unique ability to shed light on injustice and absurdity, while being forgiven for doing so because of its apparent lack of seriousness. Fools and jesters poke fun at monarchs and the powerful. Jesters were given leave to make statements that would have had another hanged. In recent times, this role has not disappeared and has entered a period of newfound importance, where media cannot be trusted to sufficiently question and dispute information provided by government and business interests for public consumption. Where others would refrain from venturing due to fears of being accused of disrespecting sponsors or of undermining the dignity of those in power, comedians may disrespect where disrespect is due and undermine where undermining should occur. Comedy is a branch of fiction. Fiction implies removal from truth, removal from direct application in the environment of truth, and yet the fiction that holds import is that which engages the recipient as if it were truth. And the fiction that engages the most is that which seems to engage with truth at a deeper level, at a collective level, at an archetypal level, in a way that retains relevance over time. Comedy's non-identical twin is tragedy. Each ties its intellectual content into its respective emotive field. The emotive field is the engaging element. The emotive field is the energy triggered in the individual or community depending on how that individual or community is calibrated to respond to that content. Where the response to the emotive field is triggered, the recipient will become either more or less receptive to the substantive content. Laughter is a stress reliever, just as is crying. Different societies may favor one or the other in a given circumstance. While equivalent, they are different. While they may each arrive at a place of responsive action, they may each also arrive at a place of impotent resignation. Neither is stern, though sternness may manifest in response to either. It is the emotive response to the manifestations of injustice that bring about laughter and crying. But it is the true recognition of injustice itself that brings about sternness. Sternness is the immediate response to injustice itself. It is the balanced assimilation of the humility of comedy and the sorrow of tragedy. There is a continuum of dramatic expression that exists between the humility of comedy and the sorrow of tragedy. The humility of comedy comes from the recognition of injustice. The injustice represented may not be thought of as an injustice, but absurdity itself is injustice. Absurdity is an affront to the solemnity of balanced beauty. The effective comedy cannot itself be absurd. It must be intelligent. It must be an intelligent reflection on the unjust. By taking the absurdity upon itself, the comedy reflects the injustice, bears the mantle of the burden. The fiction is that the viewer understands where the attribution of absurdity truly applies. Further, the humility comes from the recognition that all manifestation holds absurdity and injustice. The viewer knows that the comedy speaks to him, to his neighbor, to the views he keeps, to the figures he upholds. The humility is the recognition of personal imperfection. Whereas comedy attends itself mostly to the apparently harmless idiosyncrasies of how people live, tragedy attends itself mostly to the clearly harmful results of those idiosyncrasies when allowed to be taken to their extremes. At the far end of the scale, the tragedy is so great there is no space for humor, no place for comedy. It is where the locality of harm and the import of affront to dignity is so great that only the tears of sorrow may result. It is where the affront to justice becomes an insult to that which is held most dear. Comedy is thus the early warning mechanism of potential impending tragedy. The point at which comedy and tragedy meet depends on the characteristics of the individual and community, on the calibration of their response to the triggered emotive energy. The emotive energy can be merely experienced, But to be of use in the context of actual positive evolution, it must be processed from meaning that can be employed by the intellect in the overall development of the individual to bring value to the individual spirit. The individual spirit requires dignity to thrive. Dignity is what is put at risk through injustice. When an individual suffers injustice, it is his dignity, his sense of personal autonomy, his sense of relative personal value that is offended. Further, when others suffer injustice, the empath recognizes and is appalled at the offense against the dignity of those that suffered. But dignity is not just a sense of self-worth that can be manipulated to allow any state of being based on trained expectation. Dignity also has an objective measure to reflect the degree to which the subject, whether individual or collective, has in fact manifested its potential. Sternness is the expression of dignity. Control of emotive calibration according to intellective understanding is an expression of dignity. Respect for beautiful strength is an expression of dignity. Awareness of injustice is an expression of dignity. By contrast, indulgence in the expressions of comedy or tragedy, in laughing or crying without responsive action, is resignation and is not an expression of dignity. Dignity is in the upholding of objective justice, that path of justice that is most ultimately correct. Comedy and tragedy are mechanisms by which the indignity of the society is expressed. Dignity requires seeing them as such, so to be warned against that which gives rise to tragedy. Comedy and tragedy demonstrate the emotive calibration of the mind of the individual or society in question. Some cultures laugh at death, others weep at death. Others go silent at death. Some cultures seek joy in life, others find sadness in life, and others seek silence despite life. Comedy and tragedy are not to be treated as ends in themselves. Comedy and tragedy are tools of framing to allow the processing of emotive content so that intellective consideration and guided physical action towards a calculated end may take place. To apply comedy and tragedy as mere entertainment is itself an affront to dignity. It is an affront to the potential of the mechanisms themselves. It is an affront to the potential of the recipient to learn and act. The extent to which comedy and tragedy are taken as mere entertainment is the measure to which dignity has been allowed to be disrespected.